issue, which is the one of the most sensitive and critical issues in the world politics. And the reason why we have gathered today here is that last year, Indian government decided unilaterally to abolish the autonomy of Jammu Kashmir region on 5 August. And this step, of course, was very dangerous for the regional, bilateral, even the global peace and security. And this step jeopardized not only bilateral relation between, India and Pakistan or region, but also global peace, security, and order, taking into previous conflicts between Pakistan and India into consideration. So we need to keep in our mind that the majority of the population in the Jammu Kashmir area is Muslim. So perhaps it seems that changing demographic structure in the region could be among the reason behind the Modi's government decision to abolish the autonomy. And so political tension in the region is rising. And so what's possible solution? Jammu Kashmir autonomy status should be granted again, restored again in the short run. In the short run, in the long run, Jammu Kashmir problem is not only a bilateral problem between India and Pakistan. International community should pay much more attention to the gross human rights violation in the region. And we, as Turkey, has always sided with our Pakistani brothers and sisters, and will continue our cooperation in this regard. And the problem should be solved on the base of peace, justice, and fairness, we believe, and democratic credentials. So I would like to thank again Mr. Ambassador, first of all, and other participants to join and realize this very important event, timely event. Thank you very much, Omar.
Thank you very much, Prof, for such a detailed, insightful explanation of the current and the existing issue of Kashmir. You're very right. It is one of the prevailing issues, not only in that particular region, but of course, it's a prevailing issue all over, in the global context, just like Palestine and others. Since we are still waiting for the ambassador to join back, but I think I will take the liberty, with your permission, Prof, that I would like to request Professor Mehmet if he could enlighten us with some of his thoughts on the current and existing topic. Prof, the house is yours, please.
Well, thank you so much. And for today's event, of course, we should also thank the Pakistan's embassy to Ankara that they are leading such an initiative to talk on those critical issues, which has quite a significant, actually, reflections in our country as well. And when thinking of any issues, of course, with regards to the regional importance, such as Kashmir, we have got quite an attraction and an interest in those issues. But when in this context, when it is Kashmir and it's all about Pakistan, of course, this has quite further reflections in our memories, in our souls, in our even daily lives on average, Turkish citizens. So assessment of such a critical issue when it comes, especially as a significant and important historical, has some sort of a value for our Pakistani brothers and sisters. We feel it alike. I mean, we don't differentiate this, as Professor Resul was mentioning at the end, like the cows and the issue of the Palestinians. as well as for us, for instance, some of the critical issues, especially we are tackling with for last, maybe almost half a century right now, such as Cyprus and others. So altogether, Kashmir is a very sensitive and critical one, as Professor Ali Resul also was indicating, not only due to the fact that it has some regional repercussions and Turkey, seeking some, quite special interest in the region, but also quite due to the fact that we've got very, very special relations with Pakistan. So this goes far beyond. I mean, when it comes to the case of Turkey, especially interesting, our attractiveness and eagerness to solve out a possible solution, and at least, to posit some of our, very much special interest in that issue is all about, our special, relations with our Pakistani brothers and sisters. So altogether, I believe solving out such an issue is quite important. But as as Ali Resul Hoca, talking on behalf of our rector also, was stating the very fact that it has to be on a fair basis. I mean, solving out any issue by force or any other, aggression, as done, numerous times by the Indian government, is not the way to do so. So with all this very brief perspective, and my gratitude towards the Pakistan's embassy in Ankara, His Excellency the Ambassador, and other organizers, and of course our faculty member, dear Dr. Omar Khalid Bhatti. Thanks so much for giving us the opportunity to host, to be a part of this event, not host, actually jointly organized with the Pakistan, the Embassy of Pakistan in Ankara. Thank you so much once again. Welcome all to our students and faculty members as well, and Mr. Ambassador. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mehmet, and thank you very much for such a detailed, insightful viewpoint that you have highlighted in your talk. Your Excellency, Mr. Ambassador, with your permission, I would like to take this opportunity to just give a little bit of a brief with regards to the attendees that are here, as what really the October 27, a Black Day for Kashmiris is. So with your permission, if you may allow, I will take like 5 to 10 minutes just to give a little bit of an overview. And after that, sir, the house is totally open to you. And we will set the question answer sessions, hopefully once your debate is over, sir. So
please do, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, as we all know that today we are gathered here for this webinar to basically discuss about Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, and specifically with regards to Black Day. Let me clarify to all our audience that the people of Jammu and Kashmir have been resisting the Indian occupation for the last 70 years. I would also like to make one thing very clear, that today's debate and discussion is purely academic. It has nothing to do with any point scoring, political point scoring, or so forth. I would like to be presenting the perspective from the Pakistani end in front of the audience, in front of you, so at least you can have a little bit of a much more clarity from our end. Of course, since these are series of talks and discussions that we will have, definitely we will also give the opportunity to the other end to present their viewpoint, so we can come up with much more rational and much more insight, you could say detailed understanding of this particular phenomena, which is Jammu and Kashmir. So going back to my discussion, that the people of Jammu and Kashmir have been resisting the Indian occupation for the last 70 years. They are involved in a freedom struggle and facing the worst kind of Indian state terrorism, which we are not saying it on ourselves, but we have documented evidence that has been presented in different international forums. But again, the people of Kashmir have been brave enough, and they are brave enough to continue this freedom struggle, facing the worst kind of the Indian state terrorism that is there. So on October 27, 1947, the suffering of Kashmiri people started with the landing of the Indian army in Jammu and Kashmir. The day is therefore observed as a Black Day throughout the world wherever Kashmiris reside. It is a fact that Indian disregarding the Independence Act and Partition Plan in 1947, which stated that the Indian British colony would be divided into two sovereign states, sent its troops to Jammu and Kashmir. So India forcibly occupied the princely state of Hyderabad, Junagadh, and Jammu and Kashmir. The first two being Hindu majority states with Muslim rulers, while the valley had majority Muslim population, as pointed out by Professor Ali and Professor Mehmet, but was run by a Hindu ruler. So the Indian government and the Maharaja Hari Singh claim to have an instrument of accession, but many world historians, if we say, they reject the existence of any such document with the argument that if it existed, the Indian government would have made it public, either officially or at any international forum they would have presented. So this never actually happened. Unfortunately, the Boundary Commission that headed by the British barrister Redcliffe also helped India in occupying Kashmir Valley. He split Gurdaspur, a Muslim majority area, and handed it over to the India, thus making a demarcation that allowed a land route to Jammu and Kashmir. And following the arrival of Indian forces, a massacre of Muslim ensued so as to change the overall demographic status of the valley. Please remember this, that the people of Kashmir never accepted the illegal occupation, and they started a freedom struggle supported, or you could say, which was endorsed by the Security Council. The uprising started in 1947, if I may correct myself over here. And meanwhile, the Indian government approached the United Security Council, UN Security Council, in January 1st, 1948. Where they tried seeking help to settle the dispute over Kashmir. The Security Council at that time, they passed two resolutions approving a ceasefire, demarcation of the ceasefire line, and demilitarization of the state, and a free and impartial, you could say, plebiscite to be conducted under the supervision of the United Nations. However, these resolutions were passed, and they were passed on August 13, 1948, if I'm not mistaken, yes. And on January 5th, 1949, which were accepted both by Pakistan and India, only one phase of this resolution, which was the ceasefire and the demarcation of the ceasefire line, was implemented, while the rest never happened. I think His Excellency, the Ambassador, would basically highlight this in his discussion, but it is more like just to give you an overview. So the problem has led to a barbaric killing of thousands of people in the valley, including women and children, by the Indian Armed Forces. And since January 18, 1989 till 2020, based on the evidence that has been reported, Indian troops have martyred near about 95,686 Kashmiris. The number of widows that we have are almost 22,920. Children who are orphans are near about 107,000. There are gang rape cases, which are near about 11,000 and so forth, because as I'm trying to make my point here, the numbers are devastating. They're mind-boggling when you look at it from a research perspective. So over 8,000 innocent youth have been subjected to disappearance in the custody of their whereabouts, and their whereabouts are still untraceable. So my overall argument is that since this has been going on, there are a lot of other problems that are connected with Jammu and Kashmir. The cherry on the cake is that since 5th of August 2019, India has converted Indian occupied Kashmir into the largest human cage of the world in violation of all existing human rights treaties and so forth. And a mass genocide and change in demography is taking place even right now when we are having this seminar or this webinar here. So the political leadership of Indian occupied Kashmir is in detention, or they're in house arrest, and they're being forcibly sidelined. As we look at it from the Pakistani perspective, the Pakistan continues to stand with Kashmir in their fight for right and self-determination. And we're very thankful and grateful to Turkey and the Turkish government that they have been supporting this existing problem. and they have been standing right next to Pakistan. I think this was more or less a little bit of a brief overview from my side. Since I do not want to keep His Excellency on hold, I would allow the House to be handed over to His Excellency. Sir, please, the House is yours. I'm sorry if I have missed anything, but because of the time constraint, I have restrained myself in a way that we can give you more time so that the audience and our students can learn more about the Kashmir issue from the Pakistani perspective. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and the House is open for you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bhatti. First of all, I would like to thank Medipol University for giving us all the opportunity to look into an issue that should be of interest to the entire international community. But unfortunately, because of a confluence of the tactics of the occupying power, India, which does not want the world to know what it is doing in that occupied territory, and the confluence of the interests of some of the arbiters of the international order, in which see a perceived vested economic, military, or strategic interest in India, that this complicity of the actions of the occupier and the complicity of people who should actually know better than to acquiesce in these efforts to restrain the voice of the Kashmiris, there is a conspiracy of silence about the nightmare that the people of Kashmir are living through. So this seminar organized by Medipol, and I would like to really thank Professor Ali Usul and Professor Mehmet Babacan, and of course Dr. Bhatti, and all the other people associated with this webinar and those listening in, for providing a short, if I may say, even a small chink in the prison that Kashmir has become, to let the voice of Kashmir just slip out a little. And you will see that if what somehow, despite all these restraints and constraints imposed on the Kashmiris to tell the world what is happening and what we know, if this is so horrifying, imagine what really must be happening there. So thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity and allowing the Kashmiris this opportunity to indirectly voice their pain and anguish at the denial of their basic right of self-determination that has been the fuel that has fueled that their struggle for self-determination since 1947. Today, the people of Kashmir and Kashmiris all over the world are commemorating 27th October as the Black Day. Dr. Bhatti has elaborated on the significance. On this day, 73 years ago, Indian forces landed in Srinagar to occupy and oppress the innocent people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir in blatant violation of the partition formula of the British Indian subcontinent and in blatant violation of international law. This day marks the beginning of the long night of oppression for Kashmiris under Indian occupation. The data, as Dr. Bhatti has communicated, are horrifying. By various counts, there are almost 900,000 Indian occupation troops in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. If you look at the population of that area, this comes to about 1 Indian soldier standing guard over 9 Kashmiris. Kashmir is thus one of the most militarized, not one, probably the most militarized territory on the face of the earth. It is not the DMZ between North and South Korea. It is Kashmir, where you see the full, blatant, brazen, and unaccountable use of military power in any part of the world. There are, again, because nobody has ever been really allowed to get into that territory to get a proper perspective of what is happening there for the last 30 years. But there are credible reports that since 1989, 1990, when this current phase of the struggle of the Kashmiris for the right of self-determination started, about 100,000 Kashmiris have lost their lives. Thousands of women have been raped. Thousands of young Kashmiris have just disappeared from the face of the earth. Nobody knows where they are. Thousands of properties, orchards, businesses have been demolished and destroyed by the occupation forces as reprisals and collective punishments. Hundreds and thousands of Kashmiris have disappeared, as I've already said, and many have been languishing in arbitrary detention, from ordinary Kashmiri boys to their leadership. For a very long time, a number of Kashmiri leaders have not been allowed to leave the territory even to go and perform the Hajj. There are frequent restrictions on even on processions for Eid and Jummah prayers, or the martyrdom of Hazrat Imam Hussain. If you look at any aspect of life in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, it is unnatural. You and I, who live and breathe in free countries and in a free air, we cannot possibly imagine what an average Kashmiri passes through. Small glimpses of the daily existence are offered, and they are unbelievable. There is this grandfather going out on an errand with his grandchild, 5 years old, just to buy something or on some errand. And he is shot dead in the middle of the street. And the world sees a photograph of that dead man lying in the middle of the street with that 5-year boy sitting on his chest. In what part of the world will this not raise an outrage? And these are things that have accidentally reached us. The true dimension of the crisis is only known to the Kashmiris themselves. So, Dr. Bhatti has covered the basic political aspect of how the Kashmir dispute came about. I will not dwell on it. I have given you a brief glimpse of the situation with respect to the human rights situation in that country, in that area. I will not further dwell on it. I will just speak on one aspect of the terrible nightmare that the Kashmiris are living, and that is the use of the pellet guns. You have probably heard of them by the Indian occupation forces. The rationale for my focusing on this one aspect is that this is at least one aspect of its oppression that the Indian state has tried to justify as saying that it is within international humanitarian law and it is allowed to do that. And if that aspect of its behavior, which it believes it is justified and allowed to do that, is so terrible, and just imagine the intensity, depravity, and the sheer brutality of what everything else it must be doing. If this is the tip of the iceberg, just imagine what lies beneath that tip, the scale of it, and the intensity of it, and the sheer unmentionability of it. So I will just share with you some details of this one aspect, just to and you can then, mashallah, as highly accomplished researchers and students and academics, you can then extrapolate on it that if this is the part that the Indian state seems fit to defend, what else must be going on there and what actually is happening there, and why therefore 27th of October is a date on which we should be focusing and on which we should be talking about. So, while there have been numerous blatant violations of fundamental rights of the Kashmiri people, as I said, I shall focus on the use of the so-called pellet guns by the Indian occupation forces against peaceful, unarmed Kashmiris who are taking out processions in support of their right of self-determination. Pellet gun is a weapon ostensibly used for crowd control, but we have seen that it is responsible for blinding and traumatizing countless Kashmiris. Some have actually died on account of this supposedly non-lethal weapon. Indian security forces have been using metal pellet gun firing shotguns against protesters in Kashmir Valley since 2010. The shotguns fire a large number of small metal pellets, close to 500 per round, which spreads out as it is shot from the gun. There is no way to control the trajectory or direction of the pellets, whose effects are therefore widespread and indiscriminate. Not only the intended target, but many around it are also in the field of, in the range of being hurt. By their very nature, the weapons have a high risk of causing serious and permanent injuries to the persons targeted as well as to others. These risks are impossible to control. According to a report by Amnesty International, which has been actually, in fact, kicked out of not only just Kashmir, where it was never allowed for a very long time, but also out of India. According to a report of Amnesty International, September 2017, the use of pellet guns by India had blinded hundreds and killed at least 14 in 1 year alone, in that 1 year alone. In January 2018, Kashmir Chief Minister Mahbooba Mufti, and Mahbooba Mufti in the spectrum of politicians in Kashmir is a leader that the Indian occupation state has groomed to take its side. She is a pro-India leader, politician in the nature and in the tradition of Mr. Quisling in occupied Norway in Second World War. And if she can say this, just imagine what really must be happening. So she said, and she told the State Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir, a state assembly that no longer exists since 5th August 2019, Indian unilateral action, she told the assembly that 6,221 people had been injured by pellets between July 2016 and February 2017. So this is an Indian mouthpiece saying this, that in about 7 months, 6,221 people had been injured by pellets. Among them, 782 had eye injuries. The true figures must really run in thousands if the official confession is something like this. Schoolboys, schoolgirls have lost vision in one or both eyes and have difficulty reading, playing with their friends, watching television, or anything, or doing anything that children their age are supposed to be doing. College students have had to give up their dreams of pursuing higher education. Young men, primary breadwinners of families, say that they don't earn a living anymore because they have lost their eyesight, and they are rather now helping their families. They are a burden and a liability on their families. Several people have not regained their eyesight despite going through repeated surgeries and are spending considerable amounts on medical treatment. Some still have pellets in their eyes because it is medically impossible to remove them. Many show symptoms of psychological trauma, and all of them face everyday struggles of dealing with the darkness that they say has descended on their lives, of having to let go of simple pleasures and of preparing for difficult times. 10-year-old Tamama Ashik was a student of grade 4 in Gandarbal. When she heard people shouting slogans outside in the street, she went to open a window to see what was happening. Suddenly, something hit her left eye and blood started to come out. Later, she lost vision in that eye. 24-year-old Danish Rajab Jhat had 92 pellets hit his face only. And injuries led to the removal of his left eye. He asks, who says pellets are not lethal? Ask us. Pellets killed our dreams and hopes. They bruised our souls. They have made our lives hell. 15-year-old Insha Mushtaq from Shopian lost vision in both her eyes. She says, I was at home when I was hit by hundreds of pellets, mostly on my face. They even went inside my mouth. I want the forces who fired the pellets to be punished, but I know the Indian state does not care. I have no faith in their system. There are countless other heart-wrenching stories about victims of pellet guns documented by international human rights organizations. Indian authorities not only continue to use these weapons, but also openly defend their use. The official Indian statements call pellet guns, I quote, a modern non-lethal weapon to deal with crowds, particularly agitating mobs who resort to heavy stone pelting. Quotes closed. Indian forces used pellet guns against a Shia Muslim procession in Srinagar on August 29, 2020, injuring dozens of people, which led to criticism from international human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch. The UN Basic Principles on the Use of Force and Firearms prohibit the use of those firearms and ammunition that cause unwarranted injury or present an unwarranted risk. The 2020 UN Guidance on Non-Lethal Weapons in Law Enforcement says multiple projectiles fired at the same time are inaccurate, and in general, their use cannot comply with the principles of necessity and proportionality. Metal pellets, such as those fired from shotguns, should never be used. There are three important aspects about the use of pellet guns. Firstly, it carries indiscriminate use of force. According to customary international humanitarian law, weapons that are by nature indiscriminate are those that cannot be directed at a military or other objective, or whose effects cannot be limited as required by international humanitarian law. These weapons are prohibited. Pellet guns fit that description. Second aspect relates to excessive injuries. Rule 70 of customary international humanitarian law notes that the use and methods of warfare which cause superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering is prohibited. There is an entire convention on prohibitions or restrictions on the use of certain conventional weapons, which may be deemed to be excessively injurious or to have indiscriminate effects. Though the pellet guns themselves are not specifically mentioned, but the spirit of this convention would seem to suggest that they should be covered by these guidelines. The third important aspect is the human rights angle. The use of pellet guns violates the fundamental rights of Kashmiri people. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has said that use of a shotgun, and I quote, firing metal pellets is one of the most dangerous weapons used in Kashmir, quotes closed, and has called for an immediate end for their use for crowd control. As it is clear, the indiscriminate targeting of civilians with pellet guns causing excessive and permanent injuries and even deaths is a clear violation of human rights and international humanitarian law. The government of India is also in clear violation of the UN Basic Principles on the use of force and firearms by law enforcement officials and United Nations Code of Conduct for law enforcement officials. It is time that the Indian government is held accountable by the international community for these brazen violations of international law. Ashik, Danish Rajab, Insha Mushtaqs will have their lives turned upside down before we take action. Today, I have only covered one aspect of the innumerable human rights violations being perpetrated by Indian occupation forces in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. If this is the tip of the iceberg, one can imagine what other ugly, naked, barbaric practices are being employed in the territory, which has become the largest open-air prison in the world. Like all occupying powers, India has attempted to deny access to the world in its occupied territory. There are several pending access-related issues from various United Nations mechanisms seeking entry into the territory, including, if I recall correctly, 12 human rights special rapporteurs from various commissions and various dealing with various thematic human rights violations of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. At the same time, India has tried taking away every outlet through which the Kashmiris could express themselves. Just a few days ago, the Indian authorities have sealed the offices of the two leading English language daily newspapers, Kashmir Times and Kashmir News Service. What we see India doing in the territory in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is similar to an individual, a serial rapist or a murderer who has kidnapped a victim, is keeping it in his basement, has papered over all the windows, has soundproofed the rooms, has created a torture chamber downstairs, and is violating her every basic right. That is what India is doing in Kashmir is the state equivalent of this behavior. It is trying to make sure that what is happening to its victim, nobody should know. Eventually, either it breaks the victim or it kills the victim. India simply does not care. All it wants is the territory of Jammu and Kashmir. I believe Indian attempts to stifle the Kashmiri voices will only further strengthen the resolve of the people of Kashmir for their right of self-determination, and they will, inshallah, get this right of self-determination with the help of Pakistan, people of Pakistan, the government of Pakistan, all freedom and justice-loving people, particularly the people and leadership of Turkey who have stood by and stood next to the Kashmiris in this struggle in terms of lending them political support, as President Erdogan did at the 75th session of the UN General Assembly a few weeks ago. We thank our Turkish brothers and sisters for standing with us and for standing with the Kashmiris on this very important issue. And we hope that, inshallah, with our joint efforts, there will be a day when we will see the Kashmiris get their right of self-determination. I would like to thank again the Medipol University for giving me this opportunity to shed light on one small aspect of this issue in an effort to highlight the entire issue. I am really grateful. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. And we are very honored that you basically gave us the time to discuss one of the key issues that exists in the world. And thank you very much, sir, again, for informing our audience in such detailed manner. Professor Mehmet, any last few words that you would like to add for today's session?
Sure. Thank you. I'd like to also, on behalf of Medipol University, extend my gratitude and, of course, in a much better way, of course, salam from our dear rector, Professor Sabahattin Aydin, whom I were in a phone call together yesterday. Unfortunately, couldn't make it today because of his pretty much occupied duties on both fronts, not limited to the university, but also to his own extent to the Ministry of Health. So altogether, he was quite busy, unfortunately, but extended his gratitude and salam to His Excellency as well as to the audience today. I'd like to actually emphasize just one single point that obviously His Excellency pointed out a very critical and a very important aspect of the issue. But nevertheless, we should discuss further in a very detailed manner, in a more maybe academically comprehensive way, in a maybe full-fledged conference, hopefully within upcoming days, months, whatever it takes. But at the end, we should know much better about such conflicts, not only due to the fact that it's all about our brothers and sisters over there, but also kind of questioning the overall world system as much has been done constantly on both the macro level from the His Excellency the President up down to average citizen on the street. It should be a fair and more balanced world altogether we should build again, together. So I'd like to extend my, very sincere thanks, very humble thanks and gratitude to His Excellency Ambassador for being with us today with Medipol students and faculty. We are always honored and here to have you in further events, hopefully as I cited, in a greater event, a full-fledged conference over the Kashmir issue. And hopefully we're going to host you in person on campus someday, if Allah wills. And of course, this, the era of pandemic soon, inshallah, will get an end. Thank you so much.
I look forward to it.
Inshallah. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very, very much.
Your Excellency, thank you once again. And unfortunately, since we are basically coming to the end of our session, we are again very grateful for you. On behalf of Medipol University, that you provided us with this opportunity. And as rightly pointed out by Professor Mehmet, we look forward to further future events, along with the fact hosting you in person here at Medipol University, Istanbul. Your Excellency, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And I would like to thank the audience. We have a lot of questions, but since we have limited our discussion to 1 hour for this particular webinar, Your Excellency, with your permission, we might be sharing some of the key questions with you. And whenever you have the opportunity, please do provide us with the answers that we can revert back to them.
It would be a privilege and pleasure. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you again. Thank you, Professor Mehmet, and a very warm afternoon to everybody as the audience. And thank you very much for joining us today. Allah Hafiz.
Thank you.